Welcome to Suri Cheating Story, where we share true stories of betrayal in love. Our channel brings heartfelt, real-life experiences from those who have endured the pain of infidelity. Whether you're facing challenges in your own relationship or seeking to better understand the complexities of love and trust, Suri Cheating Story is the place for you. Subscribe now to explore the emotional depths in the path to healing with us. Rain hammered New York City like a relentless drummer, turning the streets into a shimmering chaos of puddles and reflections. Umbrellas bobbed like colorful buoys in a sea of gray, and the air smelled of wet asphalt and hurried lives. Inside his sleek black sedan, Alexander Grayson barely noticed the storm rattling against his windshield. The raindrops exploded in tiny bursts, but his mind was elsewhere, locked on the high-stakes presentation waiting for him across the country. As CEO of Grayson Financial, one of the city's towering giants, his world was a tightly wound clock of precision and control. Emotions? Those were for poets and dreamers, not a man like him. Success didn't leave room for softness, and he'd built his empire by keeping it that way. Yet on this soaked morning, something was about to crack that iron rhythm wide open. He pulled up to a traffic light, the red glow blurring through the rain-streaked glass, and that's when he saw her. She didn't fit the city's polished edges, a lone figure crouched on the sidewalk, a young woman clutching a baby under the downpour. Her thin coat clung to her shivering frame, soaked through and useless against the cold. She held the child close, her body curling over it like a shield, trembling arms wrapped tight in a desperate bid to keep it warm. A soggy cardboard sign rested at her feet, the words "Please help, food and shelter," scrawled in uneven, fading ink. Alexander caught her in his rearview mirror, and for a flicker of a second, something stirred inside him, a faint, nagging ache he didn't recognize. He wasn't a man who lingered on feelings. Growing up, he'd known cold streets and empty stomachs himself, clawing his way out of nothing to build the life he had now. Sentiment was a luxury he'd traded for survival long ago. But there she was. This woman, her face a mix of exhaustion and grit, her eyes locked on the baby with a fierce, quiet love. The light turned green, and his foot hovered over the gas. He should have driven off. Airport, meeting, the future of his company. But something pinned him there. Maybe it was the rain, blurring the lines of his usual resolve. Or maybe it was her, a ghost of his own past staring back. Whatever it was, it hit him like a rogue wave. And before he could think it through, he rolled down the window. "Hey," he called, his voice cutting through the storm, firm but softer than he meant it to be. She hesitated, glancing over with wary eyes, clutching the baby tighter. Rain streamed down her face, mixing with what might have been tears, and she looked like she'd bolt if he moved too fast. "Get in," he said, popping the car door open. It wasn't a question. It was an impulse, raw and uncalculated. The kind of thing Alexander Grayson didn't do. She froze, suspicion flashing across her face. But then the baby squirmed, and her resolve cracked. Need trumped fear. She slid into the back seat, careful not to drip too much on the leather, cradling the little one like it was all she had left in the world, which he realized it probably was. He cranked the heater up, the warm air humming to life, and stole a glance in the mirror. Her trembling eased a little, but her shoulders stayed hunched, like she was still bracing for the worst. Their eyes met for a split second, hers dark and hollow with fatigue, yet holding a spark of something unbroken. Dignity, maybe. Pride. She didn't beg, didn't explain, just sat there soaking wet and silent. Alexander felt the weight of that silence, heavier than the storm outside. "What's your name?" he asked, softening his tone to keep from spooking her. "Grace," she murmured, barely audible over the rain. "And this is Lucy." She nodded at the baby, a faint smile tugging at her lips, protective and tender. He gave a quick nod, not pushing for more. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was oddly settling, like they'd stumbled into a shared moment neither expected. He should have been halfway to JFK by now, but instead he turned the wheel toward his mansion uptown. It wasn't a plan. It was instinct, pulling him off course. The place was a fortress of glass and steel, a monument to his success, but it sat empty most days, cold and untouched by anything human. Why he was taking her there, he couldn't say. Maybe it was the echo of his own hungry nights, or the way Grace held Lucy like she'd fight the world to keep her safe. Whatever it was, it gnawed at him, and he let it steer the car. They pulled up to the sprawling estate, the rain still pounding like it wanted to drown the city. Grace stared out the window, wide-eyed, like she'd stepped into a dream she didn't trust. He got out, opened her door, and helped her step onto the slick driveway, her arms still locked around Lucy. "You can stay here till I'm back," he said, fishing a silver key from his pocket and pressing it into her hand. His own words caught him off guard. Since when did he hand over his house to a stranger? Grace's fingers shook as she took it, staring at him like he'd lost his mind. "Sir, I don't know what to say," she stammered, her voice thick with disbelief and something deeper. Gratitude, maybe, or just shock. "Don't say anything," he replied, dodging her gaze, suddenly uneasy with the warmth creeping into his chest. "Just take care of her. And yourself. I'll be back tomorrow." He turned back to the car, not waiting for more, and drove off toward the airport. The meeting loomed, but as the mansion faded in his rear view, a strange unease clung to him. Grace wasn't just another face in the crowd. He felt it in his gut. Something about her had already started to unravel him, and he wasn't sure he liked it. The road stretched ahead, rain slick and endless, but his mind kept drifting back to her. That key in her hand, that look on her face, it stuck with him, a splinter he couldn't pull out. He'd spent years building walls, keeping people at arm's length, but in 10 minutes Grace and her kid had slipped right through. He shook it off, focusing on the pitch he'd rehearsed 100 times. Numbers, strategies, power moves. That's what mattered. Not some random act of charity. Still, as the city blurred past, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just set something in motion, something bigger than he could control. And deep down, part of him wondered what he'd find when he walked back through that door. The rain didn't let up as Grace stood in the driveway, the silver key cold and heavy in her palm. Alexander's taillights vanished into the storm, leaving her alone with Lucy under the towering shadow of the mansion. She glanced down at her daughter, bundled in her arms, the baby's tiny face peeking out from the soaked blanket. Lucy's soft breathing was the only sound cutting through the downpour, a fragile anchor in a moment that felt too surreal to trust. Grace took a shaky breath, the weight of the past few years pressing down on her. Nights on the street, the ache of hunger, the endless fight to keep Lucy safe. And now this? A stranger's house handed over like it was nothing? It didn't make sense, but she was too tired to question it. She tightened her grip on Lucy and stepped inside. The door swung open, and a wave of warmth hit her like a hug she hadn't felt in years. The air smelled faintly of lavender and polished wood, a stark contrast to the damp rot of the alley she knew too well. She stood frozen in the entryway, dripping onto the pristine marble floor, afraid to move and ruin something so perfect. The place was massive, high ceilings, walls of glass framing the rain-drenched garden, a chandelier overhead sparkling like a constellation. It was a world she didn't belong in, a mirage she'd stumbled into by accident. But Lucy squirmed, letting out a small whimper, and Grace snapped back to reality. This wasn't about her. It was about giving her daughter a night of peace. She kicked off her soggy shoes and padded deeper into the house. The living room stretched out like a museum exhibit, plush sofas, abstract art, a fireplace big enough to crawl into. Grace's eyes darted around, half expecting someone to burst in and demand she leave. But it was just her and Lucy, alone in this impossible refuge. She set Lucy down on a velvet couch, peeling off the wet blanket and wrapping her in a throw she found nearby. The baby cooed, her little hands reaching for the soft fabric, and Grace felt a lump rise in her throat. When was the last time Lucy had been warm like this? Dry? Safe? She brushed a strand of wet hair from her daughter's forehead, her fingers trembling. This wasn't just shelter. It was a lifeline, a fleeting taste of what she'd lost. Her stomach growled, sharp and insistent, pulling her focus to the ache she'd ignored for hours. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, scraping by on a stale donut she'd scavenged for Lucy. Her eyes drifted to the open kitchen across the room, gleaming counters, a fridge that hummed quietly, cabinets lined up like soldiers. Hunger clawed at her, but so did shame. This wasn't her house, her food. What if Alexander came back and saw her rummaging through his stuff? She hesitated, biting her lip, But Lucy's soft babbling tipped the scales. She couldn't keep going on fumes. Not if she wanted to be strong for her girl. With a deep breath, she crossed the room, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. The fridge door swung open, and Grace nearly gasped. Shelves packed with fresh fruit, vegetables, cheese, things she hadn't seen in months, let alone touched. She reached for a carton of eggs, her hands shaking like she was stealing, then grabbed a loaf of bread from the counter. Simple, quick, safe. She found a skillet, flicked on the stove, and started cracking eggs, the sizzle filling the quiet with a sound she hadn't heard in forever. Home. The smell hit her hard, warm and familiar, dragging up memories of a life before everything fell apart. She sliced the bread, toasted it lightly, and plated the meal with careful hands like she was serving royalty instead of herself and a toddler. She carried the food back to the couch, setting it on the coffee table, and lifted Lucy into her lap. The baby's eyes lit up at the sight, her tiny fingers grabbing for a piece of egg. Grace fed her slowly, laughing softly as Lucy gummed the food with delight. It was such a small thing. Eggs and bread. But to Grace, it was a feast. Each bite felt like a reclaiming, a stitch in the fabric of a life she'd thought was gone forever. She ate too, savoring the warmth spreading through her chest, the way it pushed back the cold that had settled in her bones. For the first time in months, her shoulders relaxed, the constant knot of fear loosening just a little. After they finished, Grace leaned back. Lucy nestled against her, playing with a spoon like it was a treasure. The storm raged outside, rattling the windows, but in here, it couldn't touch them. She let her eyes wander, taking in the details. A bookshelf stuffed with leather-bound volumes, a painting of a stormy sea, the way the light danced off the chandelier. It was overwhelming, this kindness from a man she didn't even know. Why her? Why now? She didn't have answers, but she wasn't about to waste this gift. Lucy yawned, her eyelids drooping, and Grace knew it was time to find a bed. She scooped her daughter up and started exploring, her steps cautious but curious. Upstairs, she found a guest room that felt like a sanctuary. Soft carpet, a king-sized bed piled with pillows, a window overlooking the dark, rain-swept garden. She laid Lucy down, tucking her in with a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. The baby sighed, already drifting off, and Grace sat there, watching her breathe. This was what she'd fought for. Nights like this, where Lucy could sleep without shivering, without the hum of danger in the air. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wasn't ready to break yet, not when she'd been given this much. She stood glancing around and spotted a bathroom down the hall. The idea of a bath, a real warm bath, hit her like a quiet promise. She crept in, the marble floor cool under her feet, and stared at the tub. It was huge, pristine, something out of a magazine. She turned the faucet, watching steam rise as the water filled up, and felt a flicker of guilt. But Lucy's face flashed in her mind, safe, sleeping, and she let it go. She stripped off her damp clothes, sank into the heat, and closed her eyes. The warmth seeped into her, washing away the grime of the streets, the weight of survival. For a moment, she was just Grace again, not a beggar, not a failure, just a woman who'd found a crack of light in the dark. She stayed there until the water cooled, then climbed out, wrapping herself in a robe that hung nearby. Exhaustion tugged at her, pulling her back to Lucy, back to the bed where her daughter slept. She curled up beside her, breathing in the clean scent of the sheets, and let sleep take her, the first real rest she'd had in years. Grace woke to silence. No rain hammering the roof, no wind rattling the windows, just the soft, steady rhythm of Lucy's breathing beside her. The room glowed faintly with the first hints of dawn, sunlight slipping through the curtains in thin golden threads. She blinked, disoriented, the plush bed and clean sheets, feeling like a dream she hadn't earned. For a moment, she forgot where she was, her body tensing as if braced for the cold bite of a street corner. Then it hit her, Alexander's mansion, the key, the impossible kindness of a stranger. She turned to Lucy, still asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling under the blanket, and a quiet smile tugged at Grace's lips. Her daughter looked peaceful, untouched by the chaos they'd lived through, and that alone made this borrowed night worth everything. She slid out of bed, careful not to wake Lucy, and padded to the window. The garden outside sparkled with dew, the storm's wreckage softened by the morning light. It was beautiful, too beautiful, and it stirred something sharp in her chest. This wasn't her life. She'd been a med student once, dreaming of scrubs and stethoscopes, not a mother begging on sidewalks. The memory crashed over her like a wave. Late nights studying, her parents' proud smiles, the future she'd mapped out so carefully. Then the phone call, her mom and dad gone in a wreck, the world crumbling overnight. Grief had swallowed her whole, and the bills piled up faster than she could breathe. She dropped out, taken jobs, tried to hold on, but it was never enough. And then Christopher came along, promising love, stealing everything left, her trust, her savings, her hope, before vanishing with a smirk and her unborn child in her womb. Grace shook her head, pushing the past back down where it belonged. She couldn't afford to drown in it. Not now, not with Lucy counting on her. She glanced at her daughter again, the little girl's lashes fluttering as she dreamed, and felt a surge of resolve. This night had given her a taste of stability, a flicker of what could be. She didn't know what Alexander wanted or why he'd helped, but she wasn't about to waste it. She'd figure out the next step, find a job, a place, anything to keep Lucy safe. For now, though, she let herself linger in the quiet, soaking in the calm before the world demanded she fight again. Downstairs, the house felt different in daylight, less imposing, more like a home waiting to be lived in. Grace wandered into the kitchen, Lucy still snoozing upstairs, and started a pot of coffee. The rich smell filled the air, grounding her, and she found a stash of oatmeal in the pantry. She cooked it slow, stirring in a drizzle of honey she spotted on the counter, the simple act feeling like a luxury. When Lucy's soft cries floated down the stairs, Grace hurried up, scooped her into her arms, and brought her back to the table. The baby clapped her hands at the sight of the warm bowl, and Grace fed her tiny spoonfuls, laughing as Lucy smeared honey on her cheeks. It was messy, ordinary, perfect, a snapshot of normal she'd almost forgotten. They spent the morning exploring, Lucy toddling around the living room while Grace trailed behind, half amazed at how the space felt less foreign now. She found a stack of old magazines, flipped through them absently, then spotted a teddy bear tucked on a shelf, probably some decorator's touch. She handed it to Lucy, who squealed and hugged it tight, and Grace sank to the floor beside her. They played there, the bear dancing in Grace's hands, Lucy's giggles bouncing off the walls. It was the kind of moment she'd dreamed of giving her daughter, silly, safe, full of light, and it hit her hard how rare it was. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away, focusing on Lucy's joy instead. This wasn't forever, but it was enough for now. The afternoon crept in, the sun climbing higher, and Grace felt a shift, a nagging sense that time was running out. Alexander would be back soon, and then what? She didn't know him, didn't understand why he'd handed her his house like it was nothing. Was it pity? Guilt? Something else? She pushed the questions aside, gathering Lucy and the bear, and decided to clean up. She washed the dishes, wiped the counters, folded the throw they'd used, small gestures to leave no trace, to prove she wasn't here to take advantage. It was pride, maybe, or just habit from years of proving herself to a world that didn't care. Either way, she wanted him to know she respected this, whatever it was. She was sweeping crumbs from the kitchen floor when the front door clicked open. Her heart jumped, and she froze, clutching the broom like a lifeline. Alexander stepped in, his suit crisp despite the flight, his face unreadable. He stopped in the hallway, briefcase in hand, and their eyes locked. Grace braced herself, expecting questions, maybe suspicion, but he just stood there taking her in. Then a sound broke the tension. Lucy's laugh, bright and bubbling, spilling from the living room. Alexander's head tilted, curiosity flickering in his gaze, and he set the case down, moving toward the noise. Grace followed, her pulse racing, unsure what came next. He stopped at the doorway and Grace saw it too. Lucy on the rug, waving the bear like a tiny maestro, giggling at her own game. Alexander's lips twitched, a smile breaking through the stone of his expression, and something softened in the air. "She's got a knack for entertaining herself," he said, his voice low but warm, almost playful. Grace relaxed a fraction, nodding. "She's good at finding joy wherever she is." He glanced at her, and for a second, she thought she saw something shift in him. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. I didn't expect you back so soon, she said, her words stumbling out. Meeting got pushed, he replied, shrugging. Figured I'd come check in. Check in. The phrase hung there, vague but loaded, and Grace wondered what he was really looking for. He stepped closer to Lucy, crouching down, and the baby looked up, beaming. She stretched out a chubby hand, grabbing his finger, and Alexander let out a quiet laugh, a sound Grace hadn't expected from a man like him. She's something, he murmured, almost to himself, and Grace's chest tightened. She is, she whispered, pride and love threading through her voice. He looked up, their eyes meeting again, and this time, there was no dodging it. Something real passed between them, fragile but undeniable. Grace didn't know what it meant, but for the first time, she felt seen, not as a burden, not as a beggar, but as a person, and that scared her as much as it warmed her. Alexander straightened up, Lucy still clutching his finger like it was her new favorite toy, and the room seemed to shrink around them. Grace stood there, broom still in hand, her heart thudding against her ribs. That laugh, his laugh, had thrown her off. It wasn't the cold, clipped tone she'd braced for from a guy in a suit like that. It was warm, human, and it made her wonder who he really was under the polished exterior. She shifted her weight, suddenly hyper-aware of her faded clothes, the mess of her hair, the fact that she was standing in his $1,000,000 house like she belonged. I cleaned up, she blurted, gesturing vaguely at the kitchen. Didn't want to leave it a mess, and thank you for last night. It meant more than you know. He waved off her thanks, his hand cutting through the air like it was no big deal. Don't mention it. Glad you got some rest. But his eyes lingered on her, sharp and searching, like he was piecing something together. Grace felt exposed, like he could see the cracks she'd spent years hiding, the sleepless nights, the fear, the way she'd held herself together with nothing but stubborn will. She hugged her arms around herself, glancing at Lucy to steady her nerves. The baby giggled, oblivious, banging the bear against the rug, and it gave Grace a second to breathe. She's never slept that good, she said softly. Not since, well, ever. Alexander nodded, his gaze drifting back to Lucy. She's a tough kid. Takes after you, I bet. The words hit her like a quiet punch, simple offhand, but they landed somewhere deep. No one had called her tough in a long time. They'd called her desperate, pitiful, a sob story, but tough. That was hers again, reclaimed in a stranger's voice. She swallowed hard, managing a small smile. I hope so. She's all I've got. He looked at her then, really looked, and the weight of it made her want to shrink and stand taller all at once. You're doing all right by her, he said, low and certain, like he'd already decided it was true. The air shifted, heavy with something unspoken, and Grace didn't know what to do with it. She wasn't used to kindness that didn't come with strings. People always wanted something, a favor, a payback, a piece of her she couldn't spare. But Alexander just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching Lucy play like it was the most fascinating thing he'd seen all day. You don't have to go, you know, he said suddenly, catching her off guard. I mean, not right now. Stay till you figure things out. Her breath hitched and she stared at him, searching for the catch. Why? She asked, the words slipping out before she could stop it. You don't even know me. He shrugged, but his eyes flickered with something. Memory, maybe, or regret. I don't need to. I've been where you are. Not the same, but close enough. Cold streets, no one giving a damn. I got out. You should too. It wasn't pity in his voice. It was understanding. Rough around the edges, and it shook her. She wanted to argue, to say she didn't need his charity, but the truth stopped her cold. She did need it. Lucy needed it. And pride wasn't worth her daughter's safety. I don't know what to say, she admitted, her voice cracking. Then don't, he replied, echoing his words from last night, a faint grin tugging at his mouth. Just stay. Lucy toddled over, plopping down at his feet with the bear, and Alexander crouched again, letting her crawl into his lap. Grace watched, her chest tight as he murmured something silly to the baby, making her laugh. It was surreal. This man, this house, this moment, and it scared her how much she wanted it to last. But fear was an old friend, and she pushed it down, letting herself hope, just for a second, that maybe this was the start of something real. Part 1 ends here, but the story has not stopped yet. The next developments will have many surprises, surging emotions that you cannot miss. In which direction will fate push the story? What awaits ahead? Stay tuned for the next episode so you don't miss the most important details. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.